Hi guys, Rod from Think Bensonium here, and this is Rod's Thought for the Week. So over the last few weeks, I've been thinking about the importance that people remain politically engaged, because the governments we elect really do have a major bearing on our lives. In my last thought video, I also presented the idea that the political belief space is at least two-dimensional, with one dimension being the common left to right-wing politics, which most people think about, and the other dimension tracking the libertarian to authoritarian scale. I also pointed out that often people who occupy the more extreme ends of the right or left wing of the spectrum can frequently lean towards governments playing a more dominant role in the management of the lives of their constituents. In other words, such folk are more relaxed about a government that registers significantly on the authoritarian scale. Another point I made in the last video was that the Overton window, which delineates what political ideas are seen as reasonable by the voting public, has shifted significantly to the right over the last 30 years. Yet despite this shift, there is still a strong separation within the voting public, with strong political camps that are now locked in a form of warfare, which many commentators have labelled the culture wars. These disagreements are particularly prominent in the USA, and therefore it is worth exploring what is causing our society to become so divided into political camps that many are now unable to entertain dogma which doesn't fit a very narrowly defined acceptable range of beliefs. It seems to me that part of the answer involves the scope of politics widening to encompass an individual's morality. Now, of course, politics has always, to some degree, overlapped with a person's moral stance. However, it now seems that morality has become so paramount in political debate that often the more traditional political ideologies of, say, capitalism versus socialism are relegated to peripheral topics. Again, returning to the USA, topics that dominate the political landscape, often to the detriment of economic considerations, are women's reproductive rights, gun rights, and gay trans issues. In relation to such issues, individuals often give such a high priority to these traditionally secondary political issues that they will vote for governments which may occupy the more extreme right of the political spectrum. Likewise, many politicians who are attempting to position themselves towards what would have been seen as a centre politic, say 30 years ago, also now take strong stances on these ethical questions. So what is driving this sudden change in ethics in the 21st century? One obvious answer is social media, but I think another possible driver is that many people in the 21st century have become stunted in relation to thinking ethically. What I mean by this is that there is now a heavy peer group pressure that is pushing individuals to view ethical questions as black and white, in the sense that the moral judgment is always argued to be obvious. If you don't hold a certain view, you are either on the wrong side of history, if you belong to one social group, or you are antichrist, if you belong to the opposing social group. Yet behind this black-white, right-wrong paradigm is the assumption that ethical questions always occupy a binary space, where the correct ethical position is self-evident, and so anyone who calls whatever that self-evident position is into question must be deeply immoral. Yet this paradigm for ethics is flawed, because most ethical questions occupy a continuum ranging from an action being positively praiseworthy to being ethically neutral, neither praiseworthy nor culpable, through to being immoral, which at the extreme end of immorality should result in some form of judicial punishment. Let me try to give a few examples of what I mean as we consider my ethical spectrum diagram. At the extreme left of the diagram, we have actions which are highly immoral. In order to set our scale, let's put the cold-blooded murder of another person near the extreme end of this spectrum. Now, as we move towards the centre of the line, we have culpable actions which are less and less serious. At some point, we might still have actions which most will class as ethically unsound, but certainly the degree of immorality does not rise to the point where we would expect society to intervene. For example, A person who lies to his work colleagues about what he was doing on the weekend is still, under a normal ethical paradigm, committing the offence of lying, but certainly no one in their right mind would suggest that such a person should receive some form of judicial punishment for this misdemeanour. Moving even further to the right of, say, a lie, we end up in the ethically neutral territory, where actions are neither good nor bad. For example, I may get up in the morning and cook myself breakfast. Such an action is neither ethically culpable, I have truly done nothing wrong, but nor is it ethically praiseworthy. I have simply performed actions which are for my own good. If we now explore the far right of our ethical spectrum, we can identify actions which are extremely morally praiseworthy, and some of these actions might even be rewarded judicially as a society bestows some honour on the person who has enacted such goodness. Probably the most extreme example of an ethically praiseworthy event would be the sacrificing of one's life to save another. Another action which is still praiseworthy, but would obviously be to the left of giving one's life for the good of another, would be, say, helping an old person across the road. Okay, so now I've set the moral spectrum in place for you. It is with some trepidation that I'm going to jump into one of the hot potatoes of the cultural wars, and that is women's reproductive rights. The fact that I'm nervous about doing so indicates the peer pressure all around me to stick to certain dominant viewpoints, which currently control the narrative. The way I shall tackle this is, firstly, I shall present the two commonly held opposing views that constitute both sides of the cultural war. I shall then critique both positions, and in doing so demonstrate that there is a lot more room for ethical discussion when it comes to female reproductive rights and abortion. So we begin by considering the claim that assigning a negative ethic to abortion is really trying to deny a woman her rights over her own body. Protagonists of this argument will also present a line of reasoning which examines how women have been historically subject to a patriarchal society that is really, in preventing a woman from terminating a pregnancy, just exercising another form of implicit male domination. The overall argument is the patriarchy has engineered the legal system so that women are denied their right to autonomy in terms of choosing whether to carry their pregnancies to term. I guess if this was a boxing match, then I've just introduced the fighter in the blue ring. Now, the fighter in the red ring's argument goes something like this. All human life is precious, and the murder of a human is one of the greatest offences that can be committed. Furthermore, it can be argued that those who are most vulnerable in terms of being least able to stand up for their rights should, in an ethically sound society, be afforded the greatest protection, and so protecting the unborn from termination becomes a top priority in terms of government legislation. Finally, many who are strongly anti-abortion also bring in a religious argument that the value of a human is fully realised at conception due to God's complete knowledge of that individual from conception to death. Okay, so let's begin our critique of the pro-life position by considering the following ethical thought experiment. You are someone who holds the pro-life position on the strongest possible terms, and you also happen to be a member of the UK Parliament. One day, two votes are coming before the chamber, one which will outlaw the morning after pill, while the other lowers the legal gestation age of abortion from 26 to 20 weeks. For logistical reasons, you can only vote for one bill. Which one do you prioritise? The answer, of course, which even the most conservative pro-lifer will usually give, is lowering the gestation of abortion from 26 to 20 weeks should receive priority over banning the morning after pill. The reason is that a 26-week fetus is much more sentient and human-like than a ball of a few thousand cells that constitutes what is known as the blastocyst before it implants itself into the uterus. However, once this point is conceded, it becomes obvious that there is now an ethical gradient in that if you start with a view that all abortion is wrong, the degree of wrongness is directly correlated now to the gestation age of the fetus, and so therefore all the normal ethical questions around when society should intervene become paramount to the argument. Okay, so now let's give the pro-choice side of the argument a thought experiment. A person breaks into a neonatal unit and kills a 6-hour-old baby. Has that person committed a punishable crime? I think most people, unless you're Peter Singer, would answer yes to that question. However, if we concede that the taking of a newborn's baby life is equivalent to murder, then why does it follow that the same baby only a day earlier, if aborted at term, is considered not to be a murderous crime? Quite simply, why does the baby's geographical location, in the former case the baby is asleep in a cot, in the latter case the baby is asleep in a womb, alter the whole ethical conclusion of the common action of taking the baby's life? Applying this ethic consistently means we must conclude that the termination of a full-term baby, whether in or ex utero, is murder. As with the pro-life thought experiment, it also follows that if we hold to the idea that a newborn baby is not ontologically identical to a fertilized ovum, then ethically, as the ovum develops into a new baby, so the culpability of terminating the development becomes greater the further along the termination occurs in relation to overall gestation. As we showed earlier, also taking into account that right to wrong occupies a continuous spectrum, it can be argued that neither extreme position, all abortion is equally culpable and should be treated as murder, nor a woman has the absolute right to terminate a pregnancy independent of gestational age, is easy to defend. Likewise, once the ethical question is extended from a binary right-wrong category to a question that spans an ethical spectrum, the possible positions individuals can take on the issue become much greater. In an ideal world, this should result in those who are on the pro-life side of the argument balancing their views along with other non-related ethical and political considerations. For example, a pro-lifer might decide that it is better to vote for a government that will address the evil of gross poverty and gun crime, even if it has no intention of tightening current abortion law, because the pro-lifer has assessed that ethically addressing the former two issues will more than make up for not changing the current abortion laws. Likewise, a pro-choice person might relax their demands that their political representatives commit to relaxing current abortion laws, because they also assess that it is more important for their representatives to gain political power so they can enact other unrelated important political changes. For example, combating the existential threat of climate change, which a pro-choice person might also support. In conclusion, the main idea I'm trying to get across in this video is responsible voters need to resist the temptation to want to frame ethical questions into simple black and white absolutes, to the point where such absolutes trump other equally or even more important political issues. Sadly, I think often the temptation to black and white ethics comes about not because each individual has necessarily thought carefully about the ethical topic, but rather because there is intense peer group pressure to adopt more extreme ethical positions to avoid any ambiguity that might lead them to being unfairly judged by their own social group. Sadly, this peer group pressure follows a classic positive feedback loop, in that the more your peer group becomes aggressive against an opposing view, the more an individual must embrace the extreme versions of a proposition to not be accused by their peer group of selling out to the opposite side. If more individuals could assess different political positions from more angles, and so balance competing ideas, arriving at viewpoints which are more nuanced, then this would greatly help stop the increasing cultural divisions in society, which are creating mutually exclusive social groups that are now locked in a form of cultural warfare that is distorting how democratic politics can operate. Okay, that's the end of my thought video for this week. I can imagine this video could be more controversial than my previous ones, so I'd love to hear your comments either supporting or critiquing my argument in the comments section below. If you like this video, please do hit the like key below, and if you want to see more of my content, then please do subscribe to this channel by hitting the subscribe button and the bell notification key if you want to be notified of when I release new videos. Until next time, I hope your body and mind are in a good place. Bye for now.